Yes, welcome. This is F a Rap Critic. I'm your boy Malik 16, and no, did not forget that it's Black History Month. But yes, I am aware that some of you might think that covering this very album during this very month might seem a little antithetical or crazy. But let me remind you that any hip hop product can be considered Black history because it's continuing the legacy that was created by the very culture started by Black and brown people in the Bronx, New York. So I rest my case, but fully understood that this album review episode was going to be controversial from the get-go because people just seem to love or hate this guy. And we're talking about none other than Eminem's major label debut, the Slim Shady LP, which turns 25 years old. This is category 1, where we go over the album, the product itself. If you have not already, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, go to the Rap Ruler, tell a friend to tell a friend. Little background on this album: it was released through Interscope Aftermath Records with the FBT production label in joint unison on February 23rd, 1999, and is technically the sophomore album by Eminem. All right, so the first dimension that we talk about in category 1 is going to be dimension 1, the quality of the production. All right, so the majority of the production duties on this album were handled by the sibling duo, the Bass Brothers, which are Jeff and Mark, or Marky, and a lot of the material, at least 1/3 of it, was featured on a previously released Slim Shady EP in 1997. So what they did was give a lot of those tracks an update, a remix, and one standout feature that is going to be maybe not as noticeable is the lack thereof when it comes to sampling. And so that's one thing that Jeff Bass, being more of the instrumentalist of the tag team, pointed out that they learned after doing the Slim Shady EP is just how much of a hassle it is trying to clear samples, especially when you're coming from a deficit or a space where you're not known in the industry and you don't have a ton of money to throw around to clear samples. So they decided to either replay tracks to sound like samples or capture the feeling of sampled hip hop, but it was really a push to have that original production and authentic hip hop feel. Similar to what we discussed when we went over Mac Mall's debut album, and Kyrie prided himself on not sampling but still giving you beats that you would have swore were derived from funk classics. And so so repurposed tracks, for instance, the song I'm Shady is said to have been originally recorded over a Sade sample, but then Eminem and the team decided to bring it to just a stripped down boom bap type beat, and Eminem instead used the Curtis Mayfield Pusha Man melody for his hook and went a whole different direction. Now, it doesn't mean that they're absolutely devoid of samples. There's samples all on there, like when you think of tracks like My Fault, the beat follows the melody from New Editions, one of my favorite groups, A Little Bit of Love. That rhythm that Eminem interpolates for the hook, and that's pretty much the beat, and they build around it, but it's still stripped down. But when I say bass led, you think about a beat like Brain Damage, it's mostly the stump and bass line with these hard hitting drum snares, and that's pretty much the beat. And then you think of a track like Just Don't Give a, where it's this rolling bass line with these modulated accents on top of it, and then you got like these circus sounds in the background. It's really one of the most original beats in 90s hip-hop, or in hip-hop in general. Whenever I re-listen to it, I'm like, I can't think of many things that sound like this. Kid Rock is doing the scratching on there. Ironically, his major label debut was happening around the same time, and there's a lot of elements there, but at its core, because of that bass line, it sounds like raw hip-hop. Now, showing range, they tip to the lighter side with tracks like My Fault, Come On Everybody, and If I Had a Magic Wand, which is kind of dark but still light production wise, bass led. When they're not using heavy bass, that's where they get into more punchy type production. And I think the punchy production is what has characterized Eminem's music for a while, even when he gravitated out of that. People remember how he came in, and a lot of the patterns of the bass lines had a cartoonish quality to them, right? So even when we factor in Dre's production, Dre doesn't have a lot of work to do here because he only provides 3 tracks. And again, at least a third of this album was already done, even though they were updating some of the sound of it. The Bass Brothers said that they recorded the entire album on their end in 3 weeks. And Eminem famously has pointed out how in his first day going to Dr. Dre's home, they recorded 3 songs, 2 of those being Hi, My Name Is and Role Model. There's a track called Ghost Stories that was also recorded in that session that did not make it. And it's a darker but more decidedly in line with what was going on in hip-hop at the time that like hip-hop heads would love. If you've ever heard it, then you know what I'm talking about. If not, you can find that track on YouTube. It is yet to ever be released on any subsequent Eminem projects, not even like greatest hits or anything. It's just one of those lost tape songs, lost in the left on the cutting room floor. But why? Not really clear. But it's one of those banger type beats that like felt like real hip hop and would have given the stamp of approval that some of the other production here may not get. When you think of a track like My Fault, it has a cartoonish quality to it, but even the heavy bass songs have a cartoonish quality on it. For 1999 rap, a beat like I'm Shady sounded a little too simplified. Like there's only a few directions it could go. It's either going to sound outdated or it's going to sound like it's headed in a pop direction because it's so simple and open. Same thing with Come On Everybody. Come On Everybody is supposed to be this satire of making a commercial hit. It's the tongue-in-cheek kind of stuff that I used to do, and I got frustrated with management saying, oh, you need a hit, you need a banger song. Like, oh, here's my commercial song. But in it, there's still a campiness, even though you're making fun of that feel. The Dre production outside of Role Model, when you think of Guilty Conscious and that sample from Ronald Stein, The Pigs Go Home, it's doom 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 doom. It sounds like something from a cartoon. What gave that beat, I guess maybe some credibility is because one, that melody hadn't been done in hip hop yet, so it seemed like one of those melodies that should have been done at some point in hip hop, but Dre's presence on it kind of gives it more of a grit than it would have had on its own. It almost felt like the beats that Dre did give Eminem were his projection of what this white character rapper should be doing, or like a test. Like, let me see what you can do over these beats. They weren't the piano driven or Parliament funk, or even the when you think about what he did with The Firm and Nas, the bass heavy kind of tracks with intricate melodies that he gave them. He gave him the kind of slapstick, cartoony, open format beats that most other rappers probably wouldn't have touched at the time, but Eminem was up for the challenge. I don't know if Eminem heard these first 2 beats and were like, oh my gosh, these are crazy beats, but he was focused on impressing Dre, so he had rhymes to go to it, and he's so malleable and adaptive that he's gonna rap over anything you give him. Around this time, you heard the freestyle that has come to be known as Greg over the track The Roach, which is the ending track from the Chronic album that was circulated on the mix shows at the time to create a buzz for Eminem, around the same time that Hi, My Name Is was coming out. And you see what he could do over that kind of beat. So I think it was really interesting that Dre gave him these. Now, we don't know how many beats Dre put at his disposal, but the legend goes, first day he comes over to record, they knock out those 3 songs: Ghost Stories, Hi, my name is, and Role Model. Role Model being the most intricate production Dre gives him. Again, if Ghost Stories made it, then they'd be in the same vein. But Role Model has the guitar playing and more of a drum pattern that goes in line with what was out there. Sounds like a holdover from the Fugees album, the score, right? It sounds like it would be more in line with that. Like, okay, this is real hip hop, quote unquote. What M does, there's a genius in how they took that particular portion of the sample I Got the, which by a UK artist who I won't even begin to try to pronounce his name, but this has to be one of the most sampled songs in hip hop history. There's all kinds of articles and videos floating around the internet of how many people have sampled this, but the first two that come to mind besides this song are going to be Forever by the Beatnuts and Streets is Watching by Jay-Z. Look it up. It's a classic song on its own. If you ever listen to it, it's about 7 minutes long. And man, to be the one who touched this, I couldn't think of who would be better for the job. Like I said, most people in hip hop wouldn't have touched it unless they were going to make something campy. This is the era of a lot of underground rappers not being afraid to take something campy as long as they felt like they were spitting, and that's the stock that Eminem is cut from. I think of a song like Crookie Monster by Aguilar. This is also the same era of kid voices and sampling things from kid shows like Anything by Jay-Z. After he did Hard Knock Life, it was fair game. We saw Busta Rhymes come up with Get Out of Here. So we're right in that territory where this kind of stuff is new and you can get away with campy if you're killing it. That's exactly what Eminem does. But from a production standpoint, it's just interesting that this is what Dre provided him with. Now, what it does is that it fits in with, again, some of those cartoony elements from the Bass production, so it doesn't seem like this clash. It molds and melds pretty seamlessly. It also helps that Dr. Dre does the mixing for most of the album after everything's turned in. One thing to point out is from that sample for the I Got the, Eminem is on record saying that he receives nothing from that particular song. 100% of the royalties go to the original artist because the original artist is an openly gay an activist and was not trying to hear what M was about at this certain point in time and the kind of lyrics he's putting over the music. He's actually the reason that a lyric had to be changed from the second verse where Eminem comes in talking about the English teacher, because that was an insistent. So it wasn't just for the radio edit. I think that line has forever been changed. Anybody who has the original version with the opening line for the second verse with what Eminem says about the English teacher, very interesting stuff. But yeah, it was a decision. Him and Dre tried to go back to the studio and recreate and kind of do what the Bass Brothers did. Like, hey, let's just make our own original version with that same feel. But they're like, nah, this is it. This is an undeniable hit. And it turned out to be true. As soon as you hear that come on, that cartoony effect worked, especially when you forever have the images from the video burned into your memory. But there's a level of musicality that, and dare I say soul, that's missing from the album. We're still in the age of wanting to hear either club-ready, Swiss beatsy, anthemy, big sounds, or 808s if you're into the southern scene, or stuff that was hypnotic, still coming from that Wu-Tang era, right? So there's a boom bap, but it's not DJ Premier boom bap. It's boom bap in the sense of, okay, this is a bass and this is drums, but a lot of the patterns, the way that the bass and drums are used is what kind of sets the stage for Eminem to be seen as this animated rapper. I should also point out that Eminem himself receives production credit here, or co-production credit on a lot of the songs. So it's safe to say that Eminem came in on the major label already in the production bag, which we see him go into fully credited on his next albums and becoming a full-fledged producer by the third album. All things to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats, that takes us to Dimension 2, the cohesiveness of the sonic bed. Now, how well does this all go together? I talked about how Dre's choices had the benefit of sounding not out of place from the Bass Brothers production and having this like well put together marriage, because it all generated the same effect. It created this platform of mostly open beats where the melody doesn't drown Eminem out because they're simplified melodies. Again, just don't give a probably being the most complex beat here with the most elements. Everything else is really open, where Eminem fills in the space with all of his syllables and ad-libs. Pacing wise and sequence wise, the executive production team seems to have a really good hold on when to slow things down. So as soon as it's getting to its super zany point, you get a track like If I Had, and it slows things down in this again, you can argue satirical R&B-esque beat that I don't think production wise they were taking seriously, unless we're considering that this is a holdover from 1997. But it just has this simple ballad kind of feel to it. It sounds like something that would be on the demo. Even the singing in the background is a little like but what it does in sequence is it brings a gravitas and okay, now you've guys gotten to know the hyperactive side of me. Let me calm it down and show you that I can really get contemplative and serious for a note. The same thing happens later on the album with Rock Bottom, and then you get a lot of mid-tempo. Mid-tempo is going to be stuff like As the World Turns and Still Don't Give a. These are not up there tracks. Mid-tempo is mostly where this album lives. I know a lot of people feel like this is like a high-speed album, and that's a lot having to do with the way Eminem approached his raps on here, but beat-wise, no. The skill to make an album without samples, when you have like the biggest playground of samples that you ever had in the year 1999, is not something that should be overlooked. It takes a lot to make an album without samples, because you're really just trying to be in your process and create something from scratch instead of building upon. So that's not something to be taken lightly, and to have diversity of the kinds of beats you can produce out of that for such a long album, that's impressive. And so take into account that someone took that range and decided, hey, My Fault should go here, Come On Everybody should go there, Rock Bottom should go there, and I'm Shady should go here. Like, good timing. The Dre beats are not as spread out as they could have been. Guilty Conscience comes right after Hi, My Name Is, and I guess that's just to, introduce the Dre cosign element real early on, but maybe those could have been spread out. I don't know. Maybe you want the zany stuff all in the beginning, and then down to earth in the middle, and then zany again at the end before you bring it back down. But there's some attempt there. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to Dimension 3, the intentional mood and tone of the album. Okay, M has said that after the way his very first album, Infinite, performed, he became angrier and his raps became angrier because he was just mad at the doors that had been closed in his face, the commentary, and he said in doing so, he felt like the true him came out on this album. But it becomes less of a, I got a point to prove, I'm here to settle the score, more of a back for the first time kind of thing, because it's like you understand that this guy didn't just come out of nowhere, but you don't know where he came from. A lot of people, this was their introduction to Eminem, and the shock value that he was bringing in helped create everything, which is an element that Infinite didn't really have. Maybe rhyme-wise, maybe technical skills-wise, like his metaphors and punchlines always had that same push, but the characterization, it's almost like when Nicki decided that she was gonna do the Barbie and the Roman and the voices instead of what people would come to know her for on the mixtapes, right? It's a decision. It's a decision that was made with this album, which is why what should be pointed out is that this is the Slim Shady LP, which differs from the lens that Eminem is going to approach other albums, even though that's not as obvious to the casual listener. That's something we'll delve into more in category 2, but it should be noted that most of the tracks on here, if not all, are supposed to be taken from the perspective of this Slim Shady character, and with that comes a lot of this over-the-top hyperbole that Eminem has, for better or worse, throughout his career been tagged with, defined by. That's it. And on this album, he is out to shock. He is, at that point, the only reference you could really make is the Howard Stern of hip-hop. He's not quite Marilyn Manson because his music is not dark. What he's saying is dark for hip-hop, but because the beats leverage it out, it becomes surreal and colorful. Even the cover is colorful, right? It's a purple cover with crayon-like font that we only see used for things like Sesame Street or children's product at the bottom. So it's a dark in nature cover. Like, what's being depicted is dark, the scenery is dark, but the imagery used and the hues used make it pop, and that's how you can characterize this entire album. What's done on the cover is what's done on the album. Dark material in nature delivered in a slapstick animated style that makes the scales tip in the same way that the sequencing takes on the responsibility of showing you that there's moments where M can get serious and talk about serious things. There's always this element of eyebrow raising commentary, whether it's going to be satire, pop culture reference, name dropping, or extreme depictions. It's all meant to make you go, oh my God, right? So even as he's lamenting on his life and talking about the stresses he's going through and what he wishes he has, he says it in the most vulgar or crass way possible. If I had a magic wand, here's what I would make everybody do. It's not Nas's If I Rule the World. It's not, if I had $1 million, I free all my sons. It's everyone would do this while I'm on the toilet. So yeah, the Howard Stern of rap, who at the time was starting to do shows where he flew across the stage with either a prosthetic butt or his real butt cut out. And this is right before the Tom Green show took off in popularity, and he was doing extreme stuff, which Eminem pointed out on his next album. My bum is on your face, my bum is on your lips. Jackass had come out. This is the culture that Eminem is bringing, paired with the tried true traditions of battle rap and punchline rap from the school of thought of a Big L, where it was all about, let me say the craziest thing. And even Nas, to an extent, people forget that when Nas came out, he was about having shocking lines. A lot of lines aimed towards like flipping religious dogma on its head, right? But shock value punchlines related. That rhymes about nuns, rhymes about Jesus. For a hip hop legacy aspect, it's the battle rap culture, and then from a pop culture aspect, it's the let me be shock jock-ish. And that's what he's bringing and trying to give you vulnerability, but you're not going to catch the vulnerability and self-deprecation as much because you're so busy reacting to the shock. And that's the entire tone of this album. It's, how much can I say, the taboo stuff in hip-hop and get away with it, because one, it hasn't been done to this level. Two, I'm representing a different demographic. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 4, the song distinction versus the repetition of words and sounds. Does the album get monotonous in any way? The literal production from the Bass Brothers or Dre do not themselves have a repetition factor, but feeling wise, like I said, lacking that melodiousness, besides beats like Rock Bottom and Role Model that kind of play with it or just don't give a. There comes a point midway in the album or towards the end where it's like, okay, you may not feel like I heard this before, but things stop standing out sonically, where it's like, oh man, that beat, I've never heard anyone refer to the beats on this album and say, go back to that track, or let me get that instrumental. That's not where it's centered, and that's a lot of that has to do with the fact that somewhere at some point in the album, the tracks just don't have that standout quality. It's about the marriage of the words and the sounds together, but by themselves, nothing sonically is ringing out. So not necessarily monotonous, but just not memorable. Now, when we think about the words, there does come a point around that same space in the album, middle to end, where it's like, okay, haven't we heard him reference this a bunch of times? So a few things get repeated. Some are intentional, and some might just be default, the casualty of the fact that M was writing a lot of these tracks at the same time, right? If they made their way onto the LP from the EP, this is the state of mind he was in at that point, not knowing that this material would be used 2 years later, and he's still saying some of the same things. The other thing is that he would write all at the same time. Within the span of 3 weeks, it's really not a lot of time for you to sit with raps. M has become legendary for how long he sits with his raps now, and being a perfectionist that doesn't want to do a track or turn it in until he feels like he's really killed it, and he'll redo it a bunch of times. You'll hear him talk about it, but during this time, it was about creating the product, getting it finished and finalized. So you're going to hear a lot of references to the same substance use, a lot of drug references to shock you, and a lot of statements of having venereal diseases, HIV, AIDS in particular, saying AIDS was still a big deal because the 90s was all about the scare of that being the pandemic of the time. Like, whoa, this is incurable. There's nothing that can be done about it. You have it. It's over. If it's in the rap community, there were whispers about who it could be connected to. You know, it was still a shock to say stuff about the gay rapper, whoever that could have been, as if it was only one. Come on now. And those are things you're going to hear Eminem state a couple times. Sex lines are going to get repeated or talked about the same way. And the thing that I always mention that no one seems to talk about is how often he, one, reps the Outsiders crew, because he was still considered an extended fam member. So he doesn't mention D12 as D12. He's still calling them by their full name. Dirty doesn't shout out any of the members individually, but you will hear the Outsiders get shouted out individually as members. So especially on As the World Turns, like he'll shout out Young Z and Pace One in particular. But he does this thing, ironically, being so close to the Outsiders, he references Lauryn Hill like 2 or 3 times throughout the album, deciding that she's his intended nemesis for this album. Like, a lot of people always have this argument point about Eminem directing a lot of his attention towards female pop stars or pop stars in general, but they like to emphasize the fact that he's attacked, is the word they like to use, or targeted female pop stars, whether it be Britney, Mariah, but people don't talk about how much ire and pellets he had in the clip for Lauryn Hill. And this all comes from what was a heavily circulated rumor at the time. And I always thought it was interesting that M was just kind of going off the rumor. We didn't have social media back then. But this rumor had been going on that on a radio show, or I think it might be from this interview that was held in Harlem with Crazy Sam, and this kind of also started the beef with J. Rule the Damager. And they say that Lauryn Hill said, "I'd rather my baby starve, or I'd rather not be able to feed my children than have white people buy my music." Right. Take from that what you want, believe that if you will. But that was a heavy 90s rumor. That was up there with like DMX being a blood, Little Kim needing to get her stomach pumped, Miss Chalet having something in her heart. It was part of those urban myths, right? So M goes in and puts her in his crosshairs for several tracks on the album. But I always thought it was so ironic that he was repping outsiders while doing that, running with such a closely connected crew. So those themes, the way he talks about things, get repetitive, and it's a little respectful, because you get this sense that Eminem is trying to stay in his lane. He's trying to talk about the world he knows. These are trailer park adventures. These are surreal slapstick exaggerations of being bullied, having dysfunctional family issues, and being addicted to drugs and being broke and being a horn dog. So like all these things mixed with like a frat boy college humor before we had the Seth Rogans and Judd Apatow's. You had Eminem giving you this kind of madcap stuff. But after a while, it can wear on you, right? This is why we've heard the criticism from the hip-hop community ever since, because it didn't just stay on this album. So, something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. If it got monotonous to you at some point, if it started to wear on you, how far can he go? How much does the shock value start losing its value? All right, that takes us to dimension 5, the amount of songs versus the amount of content. All right, this album clocks in at 20 tracks. If you don't have the deluxe version, the regular original is 20 tracks. 6 of those are skits. So it really does float in the safe space of hip-hop classic albums. We've always said 12 and 14 is where most classics live, but 10 is really the magic number, or even less if you can get it. It gives you just less room to have that one track that it's like, With that said, if you consider 14, you are getting different topics. My Fault is not about the same thing that As the World Turns is about, nor are Rock Bottom and Brain Damage about the same things. You can argue that If I Had and Rock Bottom are kind of swimming in the same territory, but not really, because they're different factors of the same reality, and he touches on them differently. Now, Guilty Conscience it lives in its own world. It's similar to My Fault, but still a different premise, different approach. Just Don't Give a, Still Don't Give a, I'm Shady, Hi, My Name Is. That's where you start swimming in the same pool of, okay, irreverent hip hop. I think Role Model and Bad Meets Evil, there's more of an accent on those 2 tracks to just be more in the traditional lane of hip hop. Like, I'm not here to make these crazy animated references. I'm just here to spit some unbelievable punchline bars and kill you with lyricism. By the time you get to Still Don't Give a, he's trying to make this point here and kind of sum up the album. And he even goes as far as telling you what parts are exaggerations and what parts are true, right? There's this clearing up that happens. Could this have been condensed and been less than 14 songs? Yeah, I do think bringing this down to maybe a strong 12 or 10 might have made the album a lot more digestible for people who felt like it was too much, for people new to this, or just in general. It would be more pointed out and not overshadowed by his other classics. But these are all things for you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 6, the features. Okay, so I mentioned Kid Rock doing the scratching on Just Don't Give a. It's not really credited on there. You are not getting, surprisingly, any D12 members on this entire album. They do not make their appearance. The only featured rapper on this entire album is Royce the 5'9", and of course Dr. Dre, which seemed like an obligatory feature. It's like, oh, you got to be on it. And so it is especially significant that they had their fallout following this album shortly 2 years later, because wow, what an honor. It's almost like AZ on Nas's album. Could have been a ton of rappers here, 5 others to be exact, from a group that he represented, not to mention his affiliation with the Outsiders, who also don't appear on this album. But you were the chosen one, who history, the account goes that he had just met Royce a few years before this track. Really interesting fact. So Dr. Dre, Guilty Conscience, is a song that they obviously went back to the lab to create after that first day of recording, because they had to have a track together. And M says when he wrote the line about D Barnes, he was still, building his relationship with Dre. So he wasn't sure how he was going to take it. Because, I mean, that is, if we're talking about shock value, that's an incendiary thing. That's a very risky thing to say to the person who signed you and expect them to be cool with it. Because this is a case that was not as big as it could have been. It got buried really quickly in the 90s, but this is an assault case. He attacked a woman and it's on record and it's never been refuted. He actually just apologized for it in 2017 during the documentary The Defiant Ones, but it doesn't seem like D Barnes has ever forgiven him for that violent act. And it's not the only violent act against women that Dre's been accused of. So Eminem taking that, making that into a line to prove a point about why his animated violence on the song should be justified. Big risk, but he said Dre laughed about it and was cool with it, took it in stride. It makes for a very memorable line, and it makes for a really creative summation of what's being done on that track. And Dre's presence is needed, because just hearing that Dre co-signed someone doesn't work, especially when you are the new white rapper. Having Dre not only be the person that signs you, but doing a song, going back and forth with you, doing a video, letting you also jab at him, big deal, huge deal. Can you tell that this was all written by Eminem? Absolutely. Dre's presence is the selling point here, not that you're expecting him to do anything lyrical. On the song If I Had, doing the background vocals, another interesting fact, is someone with the last name Swift. And it's funny because you think of Taylor Swift being someone that Eminem would have definitely targeted in his heyday, but Christy Swift is who provides the vocals on If I Had. They sound like such early 90s canned kind of, that you have to think it's, oh, here's my standard deep R&B sounded track. Let me get some standard R&B sounded vocals, because he's singing her heart out in the background, but not in a hip-hoppy way, especially that was contemporary of 1999. Hip-hop had gotten way more savvy in how it utilized R&B. There was more catchiness, there was more of a marriage between the rapper and the singer. It wasn't this, if I had. It's a little extra. But then you also have the singing on track 13, featuring track 13 Girl. And it's gone down as kind of a tradition that Dina Ray, the featured artist on there, saying "Get Down Tonight," has been featured on a lot of track 13s on Eminem and Eminem affiliated projects. So those are the only features you get there, besides the Bass Brothers, of course, collaborating with Eminem, doing skits, doing background singing, doing those kinds of things. And the rapper Aristotle, who did the original Kin Kniff skit, which the Bass Brothers said was not a made-up skit. That was all a true recording of Aristotle pranking Eminem on a call as Kin Kniff. But because they had a fallout after this album, all the other Kin Kniff skits from then on were done by Eminem doing that role. But that interaction was a true prank reaction. Interesting, really interesting stuff. But Dre and Royce, that's all you get there. Do you all think that Eminem probably needed some other rappers on here of his caliber? Were there other rappers of his caliber at the time? Everyone would always talk about this Eminem and cannabis thing going on. That's what they wanted to see. If we had verses at the time, or if we had social media beef or fantasy mashups, something to consider on the scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 7. the question of, does the weakest song or do the weakest songs on the album bring it down? All right, you got a lot of songs to pick from when you're thinking about if there's even a weak song on this album. If you're an Eminem diehard, you might think there are none that are weak on this album, and they all serve a purpose. If you are not a fan of the kind of beats or themes, you can do without a lot of the tracks on the album. If you don't like the singing, if you don't like the satire, it's a lot to consider when you're thinking about what may not hit for you, right? I talked about the singing on If I Had, the crassness of the hook. Hi, my name is, might have never been your cup of tea. Rock Bottom, maybe you were offended because in the beginning of that song he says, if you can't relate, it almost reminds me of Tretch with the, if you ain't never been to the ghetto, stay the F out the ghetto because you wouldn't understand. It's like starting off your song telling people they can't relate because they've never been broke might be either curiosity inducing or, hey, okay, I'll skip. I think most people listen to it though. It's all something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 8, mass appeal. This album is the definition of mass appeal. It benefited from so many elements. Its first commercial single debuts on MTV with the buzzworthy tag on it. I remember when MTV actually used to play music and they would put out new songs as buzzworthy to let you know this is a new artist that is generating some talk and rumblings in the industry, and they're giving it their stamp of approval as something you should check out. VH1 had the You Oughta Know tag, MTV had the buzzworthy, and it's this little colorful strip that would appear, and the video itself is colorful. So, and you're talking about a guy who in his versus makes the decision to name drop a ton of the rock and pop artists of the day that were circulating on MTV. So it already is going to draw attention because you just don't hear rappers talking about Primus and things in the Spice Girls. So he knows what he's doing. You know, he's playing off of all of these pop culture references. He goes beyond just other artists. He's talking about Pamela Lee. And the visuals, he's dressing up, he's playing characters, so you really don't get a hold on who he is quite yet, but you know that he himself is a character because he's willing to play characters. If you paid attention to the first single, the closest thing to what could be considered a street single, Just Don't Give a, that had a more traditional hip-hop video. It's black and white, it's Eminem wearing a hat, a cut-off tee, or, you know, sweats, and doing the hip-hop gestures, a lot of hand movement, a lot of, you know, aggressive posturing, pointing at the camera. It's just him rapping. Hi, my name is, he's performing. He's performing. And then you go to Guilty Conscious, and they're capitalizing on all the hoopla and fanfare made that year from the Matrix movie. So they're doing this kind of stop action effect in their video. And again, it's the reemergence of Dr. Dre. You haven't seen Dr. Dre at the forefront of anything since he released the Aftermath Presents in 1996, which didn't really go anywhere. He, you know, had his hand in the firm, but he wasn't really putting his face out there. So this is the reemergence. This is right before he comes back with 2001, and it's a second coming for Dr. Dre. But this is great timing and real marketing that goes on here. So visually, Eminem is killing it with all the right formulas. So by the time the Role Model video comes out, it's pretty much the plainest video out of there. He's doing this Harry Houdini, sepia tone video, Daredevil, escape artist thing, but you know, it's not as eye-popping as the other two, and the other two did the trick. All you really needed was those two for commercial success, because now this album is going platinum out the gate. It goes on to go 5 times platinum in the US, and this is where we start hearing the conversations of the skin benefit, right? What Eminem does is appeal to an audience that was already into hip-hop, but now had someone that represented their demo. They're using the same kind of language that other rappers of the day were using, but it's towards different object. background-wise. The more people learned about where Eminem was from, the more it appealed. Now, what it's also doing is crossing over to genres that do some of that same kind of shock value stuff in their own lanes, but now bleeds more. What helps, though, is that hip-hop and rock are becoming more blended than they have been since Run DMC first collaborated with Aerosmith. We're talking about the era of Korn and Limp Bizkit becoming these rap rock demigods and loving that blend. And so Eminem fits right in there, even though he would go on to beef with half of the people associated. But the timing was just perfect. I remember No Doubt's Return of Saturn album was dropping around the same time, and they put out the video for Ex-Girlfriend, and Gwen Stefani's kind of rapping in there, and it's not the first time that she got to rap, so it was the perfect time to introduce this person that's going to appeal to the ska, punk, rap, pop, and rock crowds, and do it safely without losing credibility, because he's backed by Dre, and Dre just made his reemergence. So who's gonna check him? Aftermath is not to be taken lightly now. Snoop is back, M's got the stamp of approval, and he can spit to back it up. You can blame the sales on skin color, but what you can't blame is the attention. The attention that he got from the authentic hip-hop outlets was one of pride. People were proud to be able to say, yes, this guy is backed up by his actual skill. Like, he does check off all the boxes. He was approved by Stretch and Bobbito before MTV. He was approved by the Detroit rap magazines, the Maurice Malones, the hip hop shops, the Rap Olympics. It's when you start doing your homework, it all checks out. So it's like, oh, can you really hate on him? As opposed to what we saw later with like Macklemore, who seemed he came out of nowhere and got all of this undeserved success because people couldn't trace him back as far as they could Eminem, even though Macklemore paid his dues in Seattle and on the grind in the underground circuit way before, and even his first album that hit major was an independent release. But I digress. This is not about Mac, this is about M. So what that does is it bypasses Eminem from the regular rap rollout formula where you would have to have a club single or a bona fide radio single. You don't need urban radio because you're getting directly played on pop radio. You don't need a girl record because you've got shock records. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 9, the 3 I's: impact, innovation, influence. All right, I distinctly remember when Hi, My Name Is came out. My best friend in high school, Jessica, came up to me and was like, you see the video with this crazy white guy doing all these things and talking about all this crazy stuff? And I was like, no. And sure enough, later that week, I saw the video on MTV and I was like, putting 2 and 2 together, because by this point, I was still trying to figure out how a white boy in hip hop could work. And my closest references were these underground rappers. Again, I just got into nonfiction, just found out about Cage, heard this crazy song by Cage, and I'm like, okay, I know it exists on this level. But then listening to Stretch and Bobbito one night, I heard Just Don't Give Up, and I automatically assumed it was Cage, even though I heard Eminem say something about Cage in that rap. But because I wasn't really listening, I'm like, oh, he said his name. He's Cage doing a new song. And I'm like, I kind of like this. This is catchy for him. This is better than the People Said His Brain Was Infected by Devils track that I heard, which was more horrorcore. So I was like, oh, he might have a chance. But then I was like, no, I think this is the kid who I just saw in the Source, Unsigned Hype. And they were talking about he has a track about putting his baby mother in the trunk. And then I'm like, I see this video and I put it all together. I'm like, this is Eminem. And they're like, he's signed by Dr. Dre. I was like, Dr. Dre? It made no sense, but I just remember how big of an impact and how quickly that buzz started. We were all talking about cannabis yesterday, and then just like that, Eminem was the new talk of rappers doing these shocking lines, doing this lyrical, super syllabalistic flow stuff. And so I just remember that video staying on MTV for the rest of the year. everyone talking about Eminem from that point on, because he was popping up everywhere, still being validated because he's popping up on Sway and Tech's album that year, doing tracks with Redman. They were releasing the freestyles like Greg and things like that. And so the impact was huge, because what it did is it created, to coin Obama's slogan, "Yes, we can." It validated and solidified that a white rapper can exist in the space, which is something that we hadn't seen since Third Base. And even they struggled because they didn't have a long hold in their space. Beastie Boys always existed in kind of a vacuum of their own. People always respected them for being connected to so many pioneers in hip hop, but I don't know if the core hip hop fan base, the core hip hop community is like, put on that Beastie Boys, or yeah, they are what you think about when you think about the 80s and Run DMC, but you don't necessarily think real hip hop Beastie Boys. Eminem is the first to come in, and at that time it didn't create as many questions as it creates now. At that time people were like, well, this is different, this is new, this is the real deal, he is nice. That was it. Everybody was throwing their hands up like, oh, boy's nice, what can you do? And I could only imagine, I cannot speak for white people, but I can imagine that if you are a white hip hop fan, this creates a hell yeah kind of effect. Now, I know plenty of white rappers who are not fans. The homie Dylan is one. When I told Dylan I want him back for this album, he's like, oh man, not me. So shout out to Dylan. But it may not be your cup of tea, but for the broader hip hop audience, this representation was new. This was super big. This was the living embodiment of the cookout metaphor that you hear black people use. Oh, he's invited. He invited himself. He kicked the door in and he brought good snacks with him that everybody was like, all right, he can stay. And that's what it is. So since then, we've gotten into all these conversations about it. Is Eminem a guest in hip hop? Is he the Elvis? And we've heard the Benzino debates, we've heard the Lord Jamar commentary, but at this point in time, it was so new and fresh to the scene and unprecedented. The first thing people think when they think of a solo white rapper is going to be Vanilla Ice. Group rappers, again, Third Base, Beastie Boys. Then you had novelty acts like Young Black Teenagers, which went all wrong, unfortunately. And, Bone Thugs had their Mo Thugs branch. 3-6 Mafia was bringing out Lil White at the time, but none to this effect. This allowed the opportunity for Bubba Sparks to come out the next year with less eyebrow raises because the lane had been open. Now, of course, Uncle Kracker existed, Kid Rock existed. They were more these hybrids. And Insane Clown Posse, House of Pain, they just were not coming to mind when people like throwing that real hip hop, especially in the commercial space, or in easily recognizable. In the underground, it was all around. Hip hop was United Colors of Benetton in the underground. The underground always is going to be your core of how hip hop unites people. When we talk about a global hip hop community, the underground represents that better. It's like the underground is your representation of what the world should be more like, but unfortunately, mainstream is still impacted by all of these isms, right? And so Eminem being able to break the isms because it was just so new and kind of wrap people up in this, whoa. That was the impact for sure. It innovated the identity of the white rapper. It innovated the credibility. It innovated how far shock rap could go. It reinvigorated Dr. Dre's career because, again, Dr. Dre's career wasn't really super popping at this time. It was like those movies you see where somebody's like, they want something new for you. Like, I just ain't got it. I don't got it. And they come with that new thing. This will bring me back. I found that thing. This is the thing that's going to bring me back. And it did. And it just happened to line up with Snoop being back in the fold and getting this groove back. And the timing was right. It allowed Dre to make the comeback that he needed to. The influence, boy, oh boy, we can't say enough about the influence. A whole generation of white rappers were born from this album, and lyrical miracle, which is the term that Eminem himself coined, were born from this. Eminem single-handedly raised the bar for how words are put together, how syllables are used, how language is bent, and he can really be credited with that resurgence. To take this to a commercial level and be successful, Eminem just broke all the rules, literally. But because of that, he forced everyone to kind of step it up a little. So the current wave of people that just bend syllables with no problem can really trace themselves back to this album and the white rappers, whether they want to admit it or not. You bring Royce da 5'9's presence on there, you quickly get the idea that Eminem is not going to run with anyone who can't keep up with him, at least at a basic level. So all these things are something to consider when you're thinking about the impact, innovation, and influence, the three eyes on this album that takes us to the final dimension, Dimension 10, the overall timelessness and uniqueness of this album. All right, we've already pointed out how some of the production sounded like in its satire may have been a little campy or outdated, or in the fact that some of it was repurposed and tried to be rehashed from 1997 and just kind of got lost in an overall 90s shuffle. So there's a good portion of the songs on here that sound like they were of their time and can be left there. The same way I pointed out that people don't really say, oh, this beat is so memorable. A lot of these songs have been a little forgetful. I think Come On Everybody, I'm Shady, As the World Turns, at first for 1999 were like, oh my gosh. I don't know how many people have gone back to bump those. As opposed to Rock Bottom, the messages in there are kind of overarching and can live on because people still go through those things to this day. If I Had a Magic Wand, if you can get past the singing and the beat, same thing, that message lives on. Guilty Conscious, a lot of what was said scenario-wise, a lot of what was depicted couldn't fly today. So I don't know how many people have gone back and cringed when they think about that verse where Eminem's literally pointing out the 14-year-old girl that the character is contemplating doing a thing on, any advice that's given about that. Even making light of the D Barnes situation in that song, while we know now this is beyond politically incorrect. It's just like my fault because it starts going into the dark territory. It's not just a song about introducing the girl to drugs. It's like, what was your intention with that? It's this seedy grooming. We live in an era where everything's questioned. And then who is this for? You know, if you've outgrown it, like I said, that Judd Apatow feel, after a while, you don't watch Superbad, you don't watch Animal House. It really feels like the audience was teenage boys or college age boys. And so when you hear rappers like T Grizzly or Sada Baby or Icewear Vezo say, yeah, we don't bump Eminem in the hood. You know, I ain't never heard nobody in the hood blasting Eminem. There's some truth to that because, as I mentioned in the Houdini episode, the urban community is always who dictates what's popping in hip-hop. And the masses, the mainstream, dictate what sells and what circulates. But as far as how long it lasts, it's going to be the urban community and perspective first. And so, unfortunately, you know, Eminem is more defined by his tracks like Guilty Conscious and Hi My Name Is than Role Model and Rock Bottom or Bad Meets Evil. And if people focus more on that, then we might have a different legacy for this album. But this album is decorated by those more over-the-top songs. And so with that, it could have this effect of being very limited. But that is something for you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats, and that completes our Category 1 analysis and review of the classic Slim Shady LP, which turns 25 this month and this year. Join us for category 2 in our next video, where we go over the rap performance on this album, and that one should be a doozy because we're going to really attempt to look at one of the greatest technical rappers of all time, if not the greatest. Yeah, I said it. Until then, y'all know what it is. F a rap critic. They talk about it while I live it. Word to meth.